What's up, everybody? Welcome into the All 22 podcast, the official podcast of the All 22 Fantasy Football platform. It is the only fantasy football game with full 53-man rosters, including offensive linemen, where you get to choose personnel packages and have access to PFF grading and advanced stats to make decisions each week. It's the best game on the market. Try it out when you can. Okay, Ray, combine's over, but we are jumping into interior offensive line and tight end today. We're going to do a little bit of a double because we're getting short on weeks. And I will say this is one of the, if not the best interior offensive line group we've studied during the All-22 era. It is deep. It is powerful. There are tons of good options. Do you agree with that kind of high level assessment?
Yeah, I think in the past few years, when we've really evaluated the interior of the offensive line, a lot of the players, the good players that have come out of those classes are guys that we had identified as sleepers kind of early on during the process, right? Someone like Trey Smith that we were high on, that we talked about a lot when he was coming into the league, right? Those were later, back half of the draft picks. In this class, the interior, offensive line in general, at tackle and on the interior, the top guys, I mean, they're front and center. They are at the top. It is stacked. It is deep. So this is a great year to need offensive line in the NFL, whether it's tackle or guard and center. This is the year that really kind of makes up for what we've discussed over and over again, especially at a position like center, where there's just not a lot of depth of talent in the NFL currently. You have maybe 3 or 4 great centers, maybe a couple more good ones, and then the rest are just kind of there. And this is a draft class that really sort of infuses talent at that position, especially into the NFL at a time when it really needs it. So I'm super excited about this offensive line class, both at tackle and on the interior. So they definitely hold their own, and they live up to their rep.
Absolutely. And I don't know what Vegas has as the over-under for the first round, but I actually have it at 4.5, like myself. Like, I think there's a really good chance 4 interior offensive linemen go in the first round, which is unheard of. So with that, it looks like you have our main man, Zach Frazier, up on the screen. Let's watch some football.
Yeah, so Zach Frazier, just real quick, center out of West Virginia, super tough guy. I think everyone's kind of heard about the wrestling background already, and how late in the game they're going down for a scoring drive late, and he breaks his leg and is like crawling off the field to save a timeout. Like, that's the kind of player and toughness that you're getting from Zach Frazier, right? That's everything you want in a center. We talk about Frank Ragnow playing with like a broken throat or something like that last year, and playing through the numerous injuries that he suffered throughout the playoffs this past season for the Lions too, and really setting the tone. That's what Zach Frazier is. He's a tone setter. I have him as kind of like a fringe first round type of player, top 30-ish, right? We'll see how the big board shakes out when it's completed, and we've really studied all these guys. But on the whole, this is a great player, a tough player. And so I'm actually looking at a game from Texas in 2022, because as we're going to talk about here soon, and Texas has defensive tackle talent sort of all over the place. 2 big ones coming into this draft class here. So I figured, what better measure of a center than to watch that game against Texas, right? And so we just go right into it here. What you're going to see and notice is first Keandre Coburn, who I think was with the Titans now, is lined up head up, right? Which is normally the toughest assignment for a center, right? That's 0 right on the nose. And Zach Frazier just kind of deals with it, anchors, right? Gets him on the ground, uses his own weight and momentum against him, and just knocks him to the ground. He's just kind of a brawler on the inside. We talk about phone booths and how the action happens much quicker on the interior of the offensive line than at tackle. Zach Frazier is absolutely made for that. Again here, rusher kind of attacks one shoulder. He is a little bit late on stunts, and picking them up is something I noticed, because he tends to lean a little bit into his blocks that are not straight up on him, which is kind of a wrestling thing. Wrestling backgrounds are usually a positive for offensive linemen, and they are. But in some instances, that tendency to lean, like you see in that wrestling posture, can be a bit of a deterrent, which we see here when it comes to picking up stunts and blitzes. He gets a little over his skis at times, but is quick to recognize and gets the job done. Again, head up here in the run game too, squares up against the defender and doesn't allow any penetration. So just a couple really quick clips to show you what we're dealing with here. And again, that's the toughest assignment for a center. And Zach Frazier handles it very well. He uses leverage. He's not as overpowering of a specimen as someone like Jackson Powers Johnson that we're going to get into, but he in his own right has great functional strength and leverage that he uses to his advantage a lot. Has a lot of knockback blocks this past year too before his injury as well. So again, a really fun player to watch. And again, just a tone setter, which is what you need at center at a time when it's becoming more and more important to have a great center. Because you look at the final 4 teams in the NFL, 3 of them had top centers along their offensive line, and it makes a difference.
It absolutely does. And especially one like Zach Frazier here, like the quick snap, the powerful release that he does. He's an absolute fighter. Like one of the things I saw is just, this is a guy that wants to get dirty. He overpowers weaker competition. He has great latch and arm length. Like he does a lot of the important things at the center position extremely well. And we didn't even get into like the numbers on this guy, right? This is a 6'3", 310-pound prospect, 22 years old. When we were talking about Joe Alt last time, I was saying how, for a guy that was young, he had a lot of snaps under his belt, well-seasoned prospect with I think it was 2,100 snaps. Zach Frazier, only a year older, has 3,200 snaps under his belt at 22 years old. Like that is incredible, right? So 77.9 run blocking grade, 73.2 pass blocking grade. It's not amazing, right? Those aren't fantastic numbers. Like you said, I think there are things that he definitely needs to get cleaned up, but 22 years old, 3,200 snaps under his belt. He has the size, he has the strength. This is a guy that can do it. And in my mind, like you said, he's probably fringe first round. That's him and another guy that we'll get into later are kind of they're sitting on that line of, I think a team could take them. Will they? I'm not sure. But, he's good enough. Like if somebody did it, I wouldn't be mad. If the Packers didn't, I wouldn't be mad. This is a good enough prospect to be a first round pick.
Yeah, it's interesting how he excels at the hard stuff, and then some of the easier stuff when someone's not lined up, head up on you, and you just kind of have to, maneuver a bit and find that contact is where, not that he struggles, because he doesn't struggle. I mean, we're talking about a top 40-ish type of player, so this is a very good player, but he excels at the tougher assignments for someone in his position, it's a bit of a throwback, which is always interesting. But I'm a huge fan. People were surprised at the success that West Virginia had as a team this past season. But when you look at guys like Zach Frazier and that offensive line as a whole, both offensive tackles too are pretty darn good players in their own right. You kind of see why when you have these guys really anchoring your offense. So team captain type of guy too. We talked about, again, like this guy literally crawled off the field with a broken leg to save a timeout for his team at a crucial moment of the game. So he will tough it out. He shows leadership and toughness. He's what you want in the center.
Absolutely. The next guy we got, are we going to try to do Jackson Powers Johnson now? We're going to give it a shot. Let's see.
All right. We're going to give it a shot. Let's see what we got here.
Sometimes you got to fail fast, but it looks like it's working. All right, let's go.
All right, there we go. So Jackson Powers Johnson, I mentioned he's more so the physical specimen here. You might have the numbers in front of you, but just another big, powerful center who moves really well. And I mean, I mentioned it. You saw it a couple times with Zach Frazier, but with Powers Johnson, his assignment really ends up on the ground more often than not, right? So when you just let it run, sometimes you don't have to get caught up in the nuances as to hand placement and striking with his inside hand and kind of how things are working there and his snap and step. You just watch him play, and his assignment ends up on the ground. He moves the line of scrimmage forward. He climbs to the second level. He shows strength. He shows athleticism. He shows explosiveness. He shows, again, everything you want in a center with that plus physical ability that others don't have. So to me, I think depending on how you look at a Troy Fautanu, whether he's a tackle or an interior player in this class, Powers Johnson's likely the interior lineman one for me in this class because he has the whole package. plus that high ceiling. Again, you'll just see him work a double here, shield off the defender. And by the time there's contact made with the running back, he's already 5 yards downfield. This happens over and over and over again in his tape, which is a ton of fun to watch. And if you want to see a more full breakdown of that tape, hit us up and we'll figure out a way to do it somewhere where the YouTube FBI doesn't clamp down on us. So, but yeah, Jackson Powers Johnson, it sounds like we're just raving about these guys, but really he has everything you want in a center in this class. I have a hard time seeing him go out of the top 20 in the first round, obviously assuming medicals, whatever else, because that's just always the caveat with these guys. But the size, the strength, the length, the footwork, he really has it all. There's no box that is unchecked when it comes to Jackson Powers Johnson.
To me, he's the prototype. Like when you look at the position of center, it's never this monster human being. And every once in a while, like when a Creed Humphrey pops up or a Joe Tippmann, you get surprised that those guys are so successful because there is a speed element of center, right? You need to snap the ball. You need to get into position to be successful and have your leverage. And it's hard to do that when you're a massive human being. Those guys are the outlier, right? But for me, Jackson Powers Johnson is that he's the prototype, right? He's 21 years old, 6'3", 320 pounds. He's still a big dude, right? 320 pounds is not small. He only has 1,300 snaps under his belt, 90.6 pass blocking grade, 85.2 run blocking grade. Those are elite numbers, right? So this guy at 21 years old is performing as well as, physically possible. Obviously, that was a good offense this year with Bo Nix leading the way, and a couple other guys on that offense that are going to be pros this year. But Jackson Powers Johnson was just as big of a reason as almost anyone on that offense. One of my notes I have is just absolute menace. And I'll kind of reminisce a little bit, back to high school. There was a teammate I had, Troy Van Buren. This kid was awesome football player. And he was the type of guy that at practice, he would just be going 100 miles an hour no matter what, right? And it didn't matter if it was the first team defense, second team defense, third team defense going against him. Like he was going to be an asshole to whoever was across from him, and he was going to try to win every single rep. When I watch Jackson Powers Johnson, that's what I see. I see a guy that it doesn't matter if the play's going the other way, he's going to try to put you on your ass, right? And like, I love that, right? And I love Troy as a teammate. Like, that's a kind of player you want on your offensive line. Plus vision, great strength, play finisher, unbelievable language. But my number one thing, he finds work. No matter what is happening on the play, he is finding work. There are so many plays where you will watch offensive linemen that start dropping back and nobody comes to them, so they just stay, right? And that might be what the coach is asking them to do. Fine. Jackson Powers Johnson does not do that, right? If he drops back and nobody's coming to him, he will collapse the guards, whoever the guard is blocking, he'll do that and then come back and see a linebacker come. Like, he just finds work, and I love that. That is a great thing to have at a 21-year-old prospect. You said top 20. I could see it happening sooner. Like when we talk about interior offensive line prospects in the All-22 era, Quentin Nelson was a little before that, right? He doesn't make this list because he just was drafted before that kind of time frame started. But to me,
he's like our default number one, right? He's
the default number one, right? Exactly. Yeah. But to me, Jackson Powers Johnson is close-ish, like maybe not that high, but he's like right there, right? Where, Quentin Nelson was a top 10 pick. I'm not saying that's going to happen here because I think, people saw how that worked. NFL understands value a little bit better now, but top 20, I think, is almost a guarantee at this point.
Yeah, I would say so. And one thing you brought up, which is interesting and harkens us back to last year when we were looking at that class, when it comes to looking for work, there were times like fan favorites, right? Guys that are fun to just watch and study, not necessarily the best prospects, but someone like Antonio Mafi that we talked about being like the super tough guy and just loving the way he plays. He would always look for work, right? Even if the work wasn't his, he would try to find work like as soon as the ball was snapped. And sometimes that got him into trouble. Jackson Powers Johnson is much more disciplined in the way in which he actually goes ahead and finds work. He assesses things and before actually going ahead and providing that help. So it's that same toughness and aggression, but in a much more controlled manner. And I think aside from the physical traits too, and the actual ceiling that he has as just a physical prospect and being, I think that he excels at that, finding work in that sort of assistance and help from the center position better than someone like a Zach Frazier as well, who wasn't quite as refined in that aspect. Again, so I think that's another thing that really does separate Powers Johnson from other really good centers, be it in this class or in recent years. Those little details that are part of his game as well that he excels at really, like you said, ascends him to, like I said, I'd be shocked if he does get past the top 20. I think he's firmly in there. And that, reasons like that are why. So yeah, I think he gets high marks across the board. I had something else I had to say and I completely forgot what it was, but I think you get the gist about Jackson Powers Johnson. So
I think they get it. I think they get it. Do we have anybody else on the interior that we're going to watch some film on? Or are we just going to converse?
Well, we can converse a little bit while I pull up Troy Fautanu, right? We're considering him. We already did our tackle episode, and he was not a part of it because there's some back and forth as to whether he will be a center guard or tackle. Actually, speaking of, perhaps he can be a center as well in the NFL. But his measurements actually kind of seemed like tackle here. And let me pause because he just made his way into the freaking, he just pulled his way in here. So he came in with tackle measurements at the NFL Combine. Some people were surprised. Some who were more closer to the Washington program were not. But in any event, he played left tackle for Washington, number 55. And what's interesting about him is he is a real just smooth mover laterally, right? Jackson Powers Johnson, for example, that we just looked at, he's powerful, moving forward, explosive. And yes, he's got agility as well. But Troy Fautanu almost like glides side to side with the ease with which he actually gets into position and just, uses his mobility to, get around the line of scrimmage and pull. And it's pretty rare to see from someone with that stout of the build. And then he comes in with 34.5-inch arms at the NFL Combine, and people go, whoa, okay, sure, you might be 6'4", whatever it is, but you've got some tackle length to you. Maybe you are a tackle, but for these purposes, we're going to look at him as a guard. And I think most of the time those skills actually translate regardless, the mobility from tackle or the interior. He's a translatable player. So again, here at the edge, just going out in space on a screen, finding second level defender, just getting him on the ground. Again, left tackle.
It's crazy, Ray. So it worked so much better how you had it. Like when it first entered the screen and it was big.
It was huge.
It was working beautifully, and now it's super glitchy. So we can let it run and people can just watch, but
let's see. Better. There you go.
Yeah, that worked a little bit better.
Yeah, 23. So again, finds a defender in space, knocks him to the ground, stays really square. He moves almost like an interior lineman here. His base is solid. He's not getting tremendous depth in his kick step like an Olu Fautanu when we looked at him, for example, right? But he still just, cuts off the angle really well, stays really square, and just uses strength. Again, edge rusher gets nowhere near Penix here. Again, letting it run, just strikes the center of the defender. Now, if you watch here, the reason I included this tape is because even though we're looking at him as a guard, I love it. It didn't even work, but I love the swipe at the hand of the rusher here at the very end of the rush right now. It almost doesn't even work and kind of fall off balance, but he's got nuance. He's playing chess with each rush. So he's a nuanced player. And then again, just working a double team in the run game, straight ahead. And of course, powerful finish again. So this is the other contender that I have for interior lineman 1 of the class is Troy Fautanu. And again, he's played on the edge. You would have to translate some if he were to move to the inside, but I think it's super translatable. There's some other clips of his when you watch where he is actually really moving across the line of scrimmage, really showing off some of that mobility. Against Michigan in particular in the national championship game, there wasn't much of that because they fell behind so early. But you see the movement skills, the strength and the stoutness to his game and the base. So he can translate really well. Again, what he'll have to pick up on as the action moves quicker on the inside, if that's where he ultimately ends up, is of course probably part of the adjustment period that he might have in the league. But from an upside perspective, his upside is as high as someone like a Powers Johnson on the interior. Some people who I hold in high regard, think he could translate well to center. It's hard for me to fully envision that from a tackle perspective. We did it with Peter Skoronski last year, just because of his build. But with someone as versatile as Fautanu, he gives you a lot of options. That versatility, strength, and mobility is the name of his game.
Yeah, and if you even can go back to the other angle where we're looking at him from behind, right, and he's in a 2-point stance, he just looks
like
for
that. We're just gonna let this run until we see it again. Yeah.
He just looks like a guard. Like his body type is so guard. I understand the length might be tackle, but like he just looks like a guard. You don't see many people built like him in the NFL. Saying that, if a team wants, that's the one right there. Like, look at that. Like he is a wide human being, right? Like that is very guard to me. But yeah, like if you draft him, you might just want the versatility, right? Like how many teams could use a player like that? Like, would it be shocking to you if the Jets at 10 or 11, wherever they are, when a Joe Alt and Olu Fautanu are off the board, decide that this is the guy we want because we don't have any position really set. So we want a guy that, after we bring in free agents and we are kind of moving things around, like that's the guy we want. Like there could be situations like that where teams value him even more because of that flexibility, right? Playing him at tackle at times, playing him at guard. So I like that. I mean, but all the things you said, you hit it on the head, right? To me, great hand battler. I thought he was one of the best in the class at that. He really never lets defenders into his chest, which is fantastic, right? Always looking for work, just like Jackson Powers Johnson. Great explosion, great control of defenders. You mentioned it during the Michigan game, but I saw it a lot, right? Like on screenplays, when they want to move him into space, he does a fantastic job, right? Leading the way on those screenplays. Again, that's very guard to me, but hey, I saw him at tackle, so I guess it's possible. With that, I think the only other thing I'll say is that he is 23 years old already. So, Jackson Powers Johnson's 21. You're looking at a much
Chris, coming around on the age argument, huh?
When you're splitting hairs, I think it's important, right? If you're deciding between two players in an NFL draft, one's 21, one's 23, I'm going with the 21-year-old. But yeah, 6'4", 317 pounds, 2-year starter left tackle, 2,100 snaps, gave up 3 sacks, 35 hurries in the 2 years, 88.2 pass blocking grade, 61.9 run blocking grade. Those are solid, but again, I think JPJ just kind of exceeds, from a grading perspective and an age perspective for me, kind of takes the cake there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So again, we have to see where he ultimately ends up team-wise and then position-wise based off of where he's selected in the draft. I think if he ends up at tackle, he might be my tackle 3. If he's on the interior, it's between 1 and 2. I'm probably leaning 2. But again, it just shows you how good he is because his skills are so translatable that he can work and he's so valuable to a team because of that versatility. For an all-22 manager on the platform, that could be a little frustrating at times, right? Because you're like, hey, I maybe you just need guard and you love him at guard, but you kind of at the mercy of where he ends up in the actual NFL, of course, right? And what he plays the most. Not dissimilar to a Tyler Smith 2 years ago. So, again, that's something to consider when you're talking about all 22 drafts, either startup or rookie. But when it comes down to it, this is a heck of a football player. It's just a matter of what's his landing spot going to be, and then how does he grow from there?
Exactly. Next guy I had is Graham Barton. So when we talked about there being 4.5 guys going in the first round, I think, the conversation at the top 2 is Fautanu and JPJ. To me, I think Barton is a very clear number 3. So looks like we got some film here. These plays are just examples of his pass blocking techniques. Here as well, kind of similar as to Fautanu. He's playing left tackle for Duke. He can do it. Like if you needed him to, he can do it. I prefer him on the inside. I actually think he would make a fantastic center. I think he fits much more at the center position than even a guard position. But again, he offers that flexibility. So go ahead and hit play. Let's just watch some plays while we're talking about him. Yep. This is a guy that has the will to fight on every single play and the strength to fight, right? Like their edge rusher at Clemson just coming hard into his chest. He just holds out, right? His feet kept chopping, holds it up. There's another great example of like your quarterback just trusts you, right? Like your quarterback trusts you enough to just step up into what you're doing, get into your mess, and just know that you're never going to let that defender get to me. And that is just a testament to, his belief in Barton on that second play, which is coming up here. And to me, it's just fantastic, right? We only got 2 plays here. One of the other plays I wanted to get cut, but I just didn't have the time, so I apologize, is his ability to move to space. He pulls and he runs fantastically. Like he is an absolute athlete when he goes into space. And Duke used him with that many, many, many times. So another great aspect that I liked about him, not as many pulling centers in the NFL. So that is definitely something that you would maybe not get the full advantage of if you moved him to center. But it is just a strength. And again, if you have that flexibility, maybe you're playing him multiple places. Fantastic play intensity, unbreakable grip strength, like just fantastic strength. And again, he's just super quick and moves really, really well. I think one thing that's kind of strange is he actually produced better as a junior than he did as senior. If you look at his numbers, it's a little, odd, something to keep an eye on. And then he just, he missed some time from injury in 2023. So, concerns with injury are obviously real. You definitely want to make sure he's healthy if you're drafting him in the first round. If he ends up dropping, I think that's the only reason why. But he's a 21-year-old, right? 21-year-old, 6'5", 314 pounds. So a very long player, like we said. 4-year starter at Duke, 3 at left tackle, 1 at center, 2,500 snaps, 10 sacks given, 32 hurries in those 4 years, 78.2 pass blocking grade and 71.2 run blocking grade. So again, the numbers are okay that senior year, but they're not great. They were actually much better as a junior.
Yeah, and part of that could be, never being fully healthy after the injury, early on during the season and kind of playing through some things. I think the interesting thing is, unlike Troy Fautanu, who we just discussed, the pathway is much more clear for Graham Barton to be an interior offensive lineman, right? I think his arm length was like 31.5 inches or something. So that pretty much disqualifies you from being a primary tackle, right? Because of his history at tackle in college, he's more so of an emergency option in the event of an injury to your primary tackle in that instance. But the plan for Graham Barton is very much likely going to just be guard, full go in the NFL. And then the versatility comes into play if it's ever needed. So little things like that are what differentiate guys from like Fautanu from someone like Barton, because he is a really sort of high intensity player. Again, very stays square, has a lot of play strength. Sometimes he ends up on the ground when he is playing tackle. I think part of that might be because of that length when you're out on the edge. You do have to compensate for that a little bit, right? Sometimes you do lunge, get a bit ahead of your skis. And even if you're getting the job done because you're mucking it up out there, right, you can knock yourself off balance at times and you end up on the ground too, which, again, if you're getting the job done and it doesn't look pretty, you're getting the job done. But when it comes to the NFL and how that translates, I think that's why you see a definitive slide to the inside for Graham Barton moving forward. And again, because of that, he doesn't have the physical upside of someone like a Powers Johnson or a Fautanu in that regard either. But you know what you're getting, and this isn't necessarily a low ceiling player. It's just not a physical specimen plus type athlete like those other guys are. All those guys at Duke are so well coached. Just another thing you just notice when you watch the tape. That is a well coached football team. Barton just exemplifies that. They have another D tackle, Dwayne Carter, who just another super well coached, intense guy that I can't wait to talk about here either. So well coached. Again, exactly what you're looking for. I think his best position is at center, where again he can use a lot of those traits to his advantage, not have to worry about the length on the outside and how that could give him some trouble in the league. So just again, another quality option that might hear his name called on Thursday night in the NFL. So if you need a center, this is the draft.
Absolutely. So Ray, I'm going to leave it to you. Are we jumping into tight ends or are we going to finish offensive lineman conversation?
What did you think about Cooper Beebe?
I love Cooper Beebe. He for me is also a borderline first round pick player, which is crazy. Again, crazy that we would have that many in that conversation. I think he goes to the second round. I don't think teams will pick him in the first round, but I think he very well could if a team really had that need and the other guys were gone. He is as powerful of a blocker as you will find in the NFL. He is built like an absolute refrigerator. He has amazing vision. He's a finisher, right? He finishes all his plays. Great initial punch, and a lot of positional flexibility. I think you can move him all around the offensive line, and he did that in college. So really like that. Only thing I will say, when you're built like a refrigerator, you can tip over, right? So there were times where he got caught in a tricky situation and he kind of loses his balance and doesn't finish the play. And then just, again, if you're built like a refrigerator, you're going to be a little boxy in your movement. You're not going to be the smooth athlete that like a Barton is, even a Powers Johnson is. So I think he's maybe a step below those guys, but I think that a team could see him and Zach Frazier in a very, very similar way and see them kind of neck and neck. And then just the numbers for Cooper Beebe, if you're, interested, 23 years old, 6'4", 335 pounds. Like we were talking about JC Latham being a huge human being. Like that's kind of how big these dudes are, right? 6'4", 335, played 3,100 snaps, 90.4, is that pass blocking grade, and 79.9 run blocking grade. So very, very high performer. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of his. Like I would definitely take him. I wish we had more time to review film on some of these guys because I love watching him. I could watch him all day.
You're higher than him than I am. I'm not high on him. I see him as a clear second rounder. I think the reason being is the one thing that's different from him versus someone like a Zach Frazier and some of the other guys we discussed is, again, because of his size, you don't necessarily expect this, but he's not quite as light on his feet as those other guys. So depending on his landing spot, right, he's more so a go forward sort of drive blocker. He is not, he's not the type of athlete that some of these other guys are when it comes to pulling and getting out in space first and always beating the defender to the spot. And when it comes to plays like that, I don't see that aspect of his game being a huge asset in the league. He's a power player, which is great because he's very good as a power player. It just limits his ceiling a bit somewhat and the type of landing spot that is most beneficial for him. So for that, I have him as a clear second round type of player, which, again, if we're talking in your all 22 draft, that's around the fourth roundish or so, early fifth round, right? When you're talking about a top 40 type of player at that point, 40 to 50s, he's right in that mix there, depending on what you're looking for. And again, where does he ultimately land that, allows him to sort of do what he does best and not sort of get him out of his comfort zone?
I think the year matters, right? Like when you looked at last year, I don't remember who the first guy to come off the board was on the interior. It might have been Cody Mock, but it was early second round, right? And I have every guy we talked about today above those guys. So if it was last year and BB was in that draft, I think he very well could have been an end of the first round guy. But I agree with you. This year, it's much, much, much more likely that he's a second round pick just because of the depth at the position. There are a few other guys I would love to talk about, but I think, just for the audio only listeners, maybe we save that part of the conversation and we jump into the tight end film review and then switch to kind of audio only. And we'll do like our rankings and talk about the all 22 era.
Oh yeah, let's do that. I was going to tease a name, but yeah, you're right. That's probably better. So, I guess I'll start it off with the tight ends here. I'm gonna vamp while I pull them up. But we're gonna start off with not necessarily who's at the top of the board, right? I'll go lead it off with Cade Stover, the tight end out of Ohio State.
Because I love that you had to do Cade Stover, by the way, just because like anytime you have to do an Ohio State player, it just makes me real happy.
It's the worst. I didn't look at the Penn State game. So what I like about Cade Stover and why I did want to lead off with him is because he essentially epitomizes what is great about the all 22 platform, right? Because when you talk about tight ends in fantasy, everybody just looks to, okay, who are the pass catchers and how soon can they get a lot of volume? Because that's what's good for my team. Whereas at all 22, again, we're talking about the total performance of the player. That run blocking and pass blocking in that regard is super important for tight ends. It's just as much part of the game as their receiving ability is, right? And so that's why, some guys like Pat Freiermuth are more valuable in our game than they are in a traditional fantasy format where you're just looking at, catches, yards, and touchdowns. Cade Stover just sort of epitomizes that with the way he plays. I think everybody's seen already the segments. This guy grew up on a farm. He's got that farmer strength. Like, it shows up in his game. And so we're just going to run it here against Notre Dame. You see just doubling here with the right tackle to the backer, gets upfield quickly, sort of walls him off, cuts off the pursuing linebacker here, just a wide open lane for the running back to get to the outside. Quick 9-10 yards on first down. That's him in line as a blocker. Here he's detached, but again, we'll actually just cut off the D end here. By the way, side note, I think I mentioned before, I hate blocking schemes that have tight ends responsible for defensive ends in the run game, run or pass blocking for that matter, because they normally cannot hold up, right? And it's not as easy to hold up against those NFL defensive ends in plays like this, right? This isn't Daniil Hunter he's going up against, but this is a defensive end from Notre Dame that he is cutting off at the line of scrimmage, sealing him, sitting down, and allowing the running back to get through the hole before actually, again, getting pushed back and everybody gets on the ground. But he holds up long enough against a defensive end to allow the running back to get yardage. Here again, this is pass pro, just beautiful, just staying square, great base. You see that farmer grip strength again, right? He's done a lot of farmers carries in his life, and you just see it here. The defender's just going nowhere, and it allows Kyle McCord to go ahead and scramble for some yardage here. Then he kind of fakes a block in the passing game, and I think here you see him running downfield, but he's not necessarily separating with speed downfield. That's not his game. I think this play in particular exemplifies that. He gets a nice pick to allow for some early separation. Works back to the football well and draws a pass interference penalty, but he's not the type that, because he got to step off the line, he is just downfield and leaving. That's not his game. He doesn't have that type of breakaway speed. And then here, I love the nuance. I'm going to run it back, lined up to the left side of your screen at tight end here, stacked. And you see he gets the inside of the defender here, but just because he won inside leverage doesn't mean he's going to immediately just kind of carry his route to the sideline. He works back upfield, gives a little hezzy at the top of the route to kind of shake the safety who rolled over because of the motion, and then sticks his foot in the ground and goes to the sideline. And then a horrible throw by the quarterback, so it's incomplete. But you saw him use nuance in his route running to gain separation and get open in the second level. That's going to be the part of his game that succeeds in the NFL, because he's not going to blow by anybody with his athleticism. He's not a burner. He's not an athletic freak or anything like that, but he does have nuance to his game. He runs routes with strength at the top, right? He can shake off defenders when there's not a lot of separation there, but also use nuance to gain separation. He doesn't immediately take the cheese and just work inside just because he had the inside right away. He made the defender work vertical before breaking to the outside to gain that extra separation. And when you watch all of his tape, you see more throws like that from his quarterback than you want to see, which was frustrating for his sake. But that's essentially Cade Stover in a nutshell. Very well-rounded, strong player who, again, is not a burner, but can get the job done in the passing game as well. So he is that complete tight end that people look for and talk about, but just doesn't have that super high ceiling because of a lack of plus athleticism and speed.
It's a great summary. So when I look at attributes for any player, usually if you're good at one thing, the adverse thing, maybe you're not so good at, right? So if you're a great pass catcher as a tight end, maybe you're not the best blocker. I had him essentially average on everything, right? Like there was nothing that really stood out to me as this guy's incredible at this or this guy's terrible at this, right? He just did everything really, really well. There were no red flags. There's nothing that I said, this is a real like weak area for him that he won't be able to see the field, which also helps his stock, right? He's a guy that could be on the field all three downs. But obviously having no elite traits is going to limit, your production, your your draft position, right? All of those things. But he is 6'4", 250 pounds. So he's NFL size, played 1,500 snaps. At run blocking is difficult for everyone at tight end. Like you said, like they actually were putting him on defensive ends, which is extremely difficult for a tight end to do. It doesn't matter if he's 250 pounds, right? Because that defensive end could have been 280 pounds and super fast. So he did struggle with run blocking, 54.4 grade, but his receiving grade was almost an 80. That's really good. So this is a player I like. This is a player that I'd be very happy if my team took. And, you know, I'm just never going to say like, wow, this is a guy that I need to, you know, he's going to knock it out of the park. He's going to be a game changer for my team. No, but he's going to be a really good player for your team. And he's going to help, you know, keep the base where it's at, right? Like never sinking the ship, just keeping the ship afloat. That's a Cade Stover for me. I would definitely draft him. He's a guy I want on my team.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. Maybe I should have done this before the show, but I would like to see some of the game splits too for his grading, because when actually studying Cade Stover, right, I actually had to stop. I initially started with the Michigan game, and I ended up just turning it off because he was clearly hobbled at that point in the year and looked like he shouldn't have even been out there. He was playing through something clearly and was not the same guy that he was when I watched Notre Dame. So I don't know enough to know what happened when and what he was dealing with, but there was also definitely something there. It looked like during the season. I noticed he had a brace on his right knee, so maybe it's something related to that. I don't think I saw that during the Notre Dame tape, but it was there during the Michigan game at the end of the year. So something at some point happened that could be a part of his story too. But I think overall you nailed it. He's not a game breaker. So I think something like that is what kind of puts him probably in the third round range of the NFL draft, mid to late day 2, and kind of at the back end of an all 22 draft, because especially early on, you want to chase those game breakers, right? You're in a 12 team all 22 league. You're starting the top 12 guys at the position, maybe 24 if you're going a 2 tight end set. You're searching for those difference makers and game breakers. And so you're always going to chase that ceiling first. But we'll see once we get through all the tight ends where he ultimately ends up sort of in that grouping. But a lot of times I've found myself sort of going back to guys like Cade Stover in the all-22 format, obviously not Cade Stover himself, but guys like that who aren't the game-breaking receivers, but at the end of the day, you look up, they have mid to high 70s marks in both the run and pass game, and they're just solid and dependable week in and week out, and those little things are what add up to wins on a weekly basis in all-22. So he could be, again, that guy that just kind of always sneaks his way up into your lineup as time goes along, even though you're always looking to eventually replace him. I feel like he's that type of guy in all 22.
Yeah, I could see that. But, again, it's a very, very valuable player. And I think, let's save the rest of the conversation on him until we get into the other stuff with the audio only people. Only other thing I'll say is, like, he came up to the combine and did perform and did fairly well for himself, like proved he was a pretty good athlete. So love to see that. Who do we got next?
All right, we got your 2 guys here. I'm going to let you run with these 2 and go with, I think you had Theo Johnson up next. I think he was first in your file. So I'm going to pull that up here and we can get started.
Theo Johnson is a very interesting prospect at tight end because, Ray, you're not going to like me when I say this, but a lot of people are saying, man, Penn State knows how to ruin tight end prospects, because this is a 6'6", 264-pound tight end that performed at an elite level at the combine, right? So we're talking about a player that has the size, speed, athleticism to be a very, very special player. But when I watched his film, I didn't really see that, right? Like I didn't see a super special player. Just before we jump into the film, so 23 years old, 6'6", 264, 1,700 snaps, 55.9 run blocking grade. That's going to be common. You're going to see that with basically all these tight ends. And then a 67.2 receiving grade, right? 6'6", 264, and a burner with only a 67.2 receiving grade. And that's kind of where I saw him, right, when I was watching the tape. So just at a high level, I did see this very smooth athlete with great movement skills, decent blocking technique. Like I saw the technique to be a good blocker. But what else I saw is I saw him on a lot of these routes. He almost runs his routes into the coverage. Like instead of trying to set up the defender to break off of him, he almost sets up the defender to run into him and giving the defenders a lot of opportunity to catch up. I think he could be a lot better in the NFL than he was in college, which is not something that I like to draft for. Like I never want to draft a player with that in mind because that's a huge gamble and a huge risk to take. But for him, there might be a lot of truth behind it. So let's go ahead and watch the film here.
Yep. So lined up off left tackle here at tight end.
Yes, off left tackle. This is a crossing route that I just wanted to show a little bit of that athleticism and yak ability. Again, nothing special really, but it's just, if you want to get a nice 20-yard gain with your tight end and have him just streak across the field, this is a guy that can absolutely do that, right? So catches the ball, smooth transition to head up the field. He's not a burner. Like he didn't break away and make guys miss, but he did a nice job. Second one here is kind of more of what I'm talking about. Like if we can watch this angle's fine. So if you watch him on the right here, lined up on the right, number 84, he runs essentially up the field and into the defender's chest. Like he sets him up really nicely where I thought he was going to make a different move, but he didn't. He made the move the defender expected and he kind of stayed with him. Like the defender had a very easy job staying in coverage once they met there. So we'll watch it again here. So you watch him set up the defender, but right there, he should probably start coming in a little more flat. He rounds it. The defender just sticks him, right? Like it was a very easy coverage on a large tight end, right? He gets into his chest and the quarterback tries to trust him. Drew Aller here tries to trust him. But he didn't even make a really nice play on a ball for a 6'6", 260-pound player. He didn't even really make a strong push to come back to the ball. Again, these are all things I think could be fixed for a player of this caliber with that athleticism. It's a little concerning to me.
Yeah, I think you got him. You got him nailed, really. One thing to note is he does have a history of shoulder issues. I know he's had at least one shoulder surgery, and I think had injured it even heading into college. So sometimes that kind of puts into perspective some of the blocking that you do see on tape and some of the physicality to where he will get his body into position because he's an athlete and such. And it's almost like there's a want to, but he doesn't really drive home what he's trying to do in the run game when it comes to blocking. And there is a bit of a lack of an FU to his game in that respect. When you're 6'6", 264, and I mean, I've seen him up close in person, just walking on the sidewalk with him, and he is an absolute just brick house. And he did have a good Senior Bowl. I mean, this is an absolute specimen, like you mentioned. His combine measurables, fantastic. He can run. He has a great build, great athlete, but there's just those aspects of his game that never quite came together, whether it was the physicality in the run game or a lot of the nuance when it came to route running. When he had space to work with, he was fine. He was great because he could just let his athleticism just be put on display and really show. But some of the nuance against tougher opponents like Ohio State just was kind of missing. And some of that was on there. There's a quarterback transition he went through too. And Aller himself, what's the chicken or the egg? Was Aller not necessarily comfortable throwing over the middle of the field because of some of those issues at the tight end spot when it came to those nuanced route runners in the middle of the field where the ball is at more risk? Who's to say? But when it comes to Theo Johnson, you never saw that aspect of the game that really made you say, okay, perfect. Like, I get it. He checked all the athletic boxes and I see this. So that can really sort of ascend him to like a top 40 pick, which physically he could be, but you never quite saw that on tape. But then he went out and did have a very good Senior Bowl. So where that ultimately ends up, I think probably mid-second round is where I'd ultimately have him. But again, what you say as far as the player, I mean, you got it nailed. That's pretty much who he is in a nutshell.
I think draft position, you have him a little higher than me. I think this is more of a third or even early fourth round player. The athlete's great, but again, I just got to see more on tape. But
there's too many guys like me in the league who are going to see that athleticism and be like, yep, I got him.
You might be right.
I can make that guy a player, even if more often than not, like that's instinctive at times and it's kind of innate. But yeah.
Well, and I will say just a caveat because we're going to the next guy, which I'm honestly a little nervous.
Yeah, it's
to talk
also
about
not
the next
fair,
guy.
but let's
Right.
go.
No, but what I'm going to say next is when we're doing this, every year we learn something new, right? Like I think there are positions that people are really good at evaluating, and there's positions that you need to learn and might be a little more difficult. I'd say my strength is probably offensive line, defensive back, linebacker. Yeah, I do okay with defensive linemen, but receivers really hard, tight ends really hard. Quarterback's obviously like impossible. Nobody gets quarterback right. I'll just say that. But tight end is really tricky, right? And last year when I did my all 22 rankings, I did not have Sam Laporta on my top 15. Okay. So like meeting of the all 22 era, like I kept him off. He wasn't even on there, right? And he was incredible this past year because situation is so important, especially a tight end. Where you go matters. He went to the Lions. Coach was a former tight end. Did great. That could very well happen for Theo Johnson. That could very well happen to the next guy, which is Brock Bowers. When I watch Brock Bowers, I worry. People love him. It just isn't there for me. There's like we were talking about Drake May a little while back about how Drake May, I was hard on him because I loved him. Brock Bowers is not that for me. I'm hard on him because I actually worry that at the next level, this guy is not going to be anywhere near the same player that he was, in college. People were saying, well, he showed up to the combine. He was bigger than we expected, right? I think he was 6'4", 240. Sam Laporta was 6'3", 245. The way I look at that is like Sam Laporta probably plays at 255, lost weight so he could run a good 40 and look good at the combine. I think Brock Bowers was pounding food probably to get to 240. Like, I think that the range is different, right? Where one's probably really 250, 255. One's probably really 225, 230. Like, I think Brock Bowers is much smaller than 240 at playing weight, which to me, a tight end is a huge concern. Saying that, this is an absolute menace of a player when the ball is in his hand. He has probably the best yak ability of any tight end I've ever watched. It's absolutely incredible. But when I think people are talking about him as like the best route runner they've ever seen at tight end in college, I disagree. I think a lot of what they do is more like how a running back catches the ball. It's like, let's line him out at H-back and he's going to catch a screen, or he's going to be, it's a quick drop off to him and let him just run and get yards, right? And he's fantastic at that. He does have some plays where he's catching the ball down the field and shows why he's this athletic freak. 100%, absolutely. I agree 100%. He's capable of it against college players. Let's watch some tape. Let's get into this. But this first play here is just that. This is them creating. This is him against Alabama. I think he ended this game with only 55 yards on 5 catches. I think 30 of those yards were here, right? It was a drop off. He didn't do anything special, right? There's no +2 for the quarterback for getting a 30-yard pass. This is the quarterback just literally essentially hands him the ball and he just runs because he's a very athletic football player. That's what a lot of his production was to me. Still Alabama game. Showed a little bit of his blocking ability, I think, on this play. I apologize if you want to maybe, we can watch it from
off left tackle. Probably.
Off left.
This is the better view.
Yeah, and it's just him showing that he's willing to do it, right? He's willing to do it. He takes on a legit massive defensive end and does a decent job. Like, he didn't hold the block long enough, in my opinion, for it to be like an absolute win. But this is again, in my opinion, probably a 230-pound player going against what looks like a 260, 270-pound defensive end and doing a pretty good job. He's willing to do that stuff. Love that about this player. He's absolutely scrappy. Okay, this is the Brock Bowers trying to be a downfield athlete, but going against top competition, which is NFL competition. I don't see the separation, right? Here he's lined up in the backfield. Again, they're trying to be creative with him to create for him. And then when it came to him separating and him making a play on the ball against an NFL type player, he comes up short. They run this. They try to get the ball to him the next play, which is the next play I show here. And again, they're trying to be creative getting him the ball. And again, I just don't see separation happening at a high level here. And the defender makes what is, in my opinion, a pretty easy play on the football.
Like, that's a bad throw too, a bad decision rather, but
absolutely a bad decision because Bowers wasn't open, right? But he was trusting his best offensive player to try to make a play and make something happen. He should have went deep into the end zone. That guy was wide open, which is probably what should have happened. Bowers on this play might have been just a decoy, right? He kind of looks like he's a decoy. He runs into the defender. The other receiver goes deep. Makes sense. But anyway, my overall thoughts on Bauer are just, this is a very willing blocker that if you watch the film, his most successful blocks are against smaller linebackers, defensive backs, safeties, corners. When he is asked to block bigger defensive ends, defensive tackles, a lot of times they run away from him. They're not using him as like this blocking player to create a lane for a running back. That's not what they do. It's usually happening when they're running away from him, which is fine, right? Again, he's a tight end. Most tight ends aren't great blockers, so it is what it is, which in all 22 is going to limit how he scores for you. Just putting that out there. Then as a receiver, the quick game, the screens, the drop-offs, letting him be a yak player is smart, and it's something an NFL team very well could do that would make him productive. But I think that his down-the-field receiving ability is being exaggerated a little bit right now, and that's definitely worrisome for me. He had 2,500 yards in college with 26 touchdowns, which is insane. But 1,400 of those yards, almost 1,500, were after the catch. So more than half of his yards were after the catch. Again, that's a positive in some aspects if he goes to the right offense who knows how to use him. But if he goes to an offense where they're going to ask him to be this true route runner, I'm not sure he's going to exceed expectations like people think he will.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it is all going to come down to landing spot with him. And he's almost like the measurements are exactly that of Dalton Kincaid, right? And when you look at a high level just of the actual, the measurements and just the overall style of play, when you talk about essentially being a big receiver, that's what Dalton Kincaid was last year and was drafted late in the first. And I think Brock Bowers, especially with the yards after the catches, is just better at that than Dalton Kincaid was. But he has to go to the right place in the right system to where that's what he's going to be asked to do. And that's that, because if he can't be a traditional inline type of tight end or just, you have your system and you just plug him in there as the tight end and roll from there. You do need a plan for someone like this, because if you have a plan for someone like this, the rewards can be great because of his yak ability. And that's a bit of a throwback for NFL defenses. They're not used to yak from tight ends. Okay. It's different. It's a unique thing to prepare for, on top of, whatever threats might be out wide as well. So in the right situation, he can be a menacing mismatch for opponents, which would reflect well on his performance in the league. But yeah, he's not a just plug and play situation proof type of player, because again, he is essentially a big receiver who is fine sticking his nose in there, which I like about him. But he's not giving you any space in the run game. He's not opening anything up for you in the run game. He's just, doing his job because he's a tough kid and tough player, which is good. But you're not getting any plus value there. I don't struggle with him because I do like him a lot. But when I look back at Kyle Pitts a couple years ago, like, to me, that was the superior prospect in nearly every regard. And even if you wanted to characterize their styles of play as the same, despite the different builds and such, but, you want to talk about receiver first and the ability to detach off the line, split out wide and cause conflict with the defense that way. Bowers does all of that, but he's not 6'6", 240. And, it's different, right? It's a different specimen that we're talking about here. He's much more of like an H-back type of big receiver than anything else. Like, of course, if he went to San Francisco, the internet would break. It's not going to happen. I don't think he lasts that long. But he's that type of player, which to me, I think I mentioned it last episode, there were some talks, there's always something posted out there on Twitter nowadays, but people talking about Bowers potentially going to the Chargers at 5. I think it's a great fit for him, but I think that's a bit high for a player of his caliber, even though he's a fantastic player. I just think when you talk about value and what he brings, if you're taking someone in the top 5, I want all the boxes checked plus, elite physical traits and build. And he has some elite physical traits, many translatable physical traits, but not the prototype type of player, which I think, again, splitting hairs a bit because we're talking in the context of a top 5 pick. I think he's a clear top 12 to 15 type of pick in this draft and maybe top 8 overall player, regardless of position. But because of position value and his overall physical build, I think that knocks him down just a little bit. But again, we're not talking bad about the player. I think we're still saying he's very high up there in this class. It's just, he's been talked about and he's been given his flowers for the last year and a half plus, and rightfully so. But let's also talk about some of these other things that are important that may limit him in certain situations in the league.
Yeah, and I'm gonna save some of my comments for when we start our rankings, but I think there is more to say. Like I think
you really don't like this guy. Oof.
No, it's just like you said it right. He plays a lot of H-back. You're going to spend a top 10 pick on an H-back. That's really hard for me to stomach unless the player is surefire going to be George Kittle, right? Like if you're getting me George Kittle, great. If you're getting me Joshua DeGuara, I'm going to strangle my GM, right? Like that's so hard to stomach.
He is not Josiah DeGuara. Let's just be very clear for anybody listening. He's not that. He's way better.
Of course he is.
Than DeGuara was.
I'm just putting that out there. Okay. Do you have film on anybody else here?
So there's one more guy I'm going to bring up.
If it's not Sanders, we did something wrong.
No, it's Sanders. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I made it sound like a cliffhanger, huh? Like
a little bit.
Who's it going to be? Yeah. So Jatavian Sanders is the other tight end in the class here out of Texas that people kind of have as like the consensus number 2 tight end in the class. Much more of a receiver tight end again, but he's more so the down the seam type of player than someone like Bowers, who's a lot more yak and kind of maybe some sharp cuts on an out or an in or something like that way, as opposed to just strictly down the seam downfield type of separation. Sanders is more that downfield type of power forward player, but this isn't going to be all roses. So I'm going to start off here, right? Because again, all 22, everything comes into play, not just your receiving stats as a tight end. We have him here lined up next to the right tackle here, not the one coming in motion, but to the outside of end here. And we're going to watch him try to seal off number 92. I think it's the exact same player that we saw Bowers go head up against a couple minutes ago. And I'm just going to let it run. Now that we know who Sanders is, number 0 here on the right side of the screen here, just inside of the receiver. Yeah. What is that? What is that? That is. I mean, it's a term used, but this is literally playing patty cake with the defender. So essentially, he does not get to his spot quick enough. The defender beats him to his spot, so he does not cut him off. And now because he's out of position, I guess I'm glad that you had the wherewithal to understand that you could be called for holding because you're out of position if you started grabbing. But also, I mean, just kind of throwing your arms up and just like, hey, it wasn't me. Like that's not good. That was not a fun watch in the film room after the game. So there's that. And I put that on here because that's not the only time you see something like that. So here again, he's lined up at the top of the screen here on the right side, and he's just going to, again, get downfield, find a hole in the zone, up the seam, just allow for a big target for his quarterback, and then just get a few yards. Gets tackled by the first man, but again, falls forward, got an extra 5 yards or so there, just presenting a nice downfield second level target for his quarterback. That's his game. He's that type of player. So these first 2 plays here, we're kind of seeing a theme. So here he is again, lined up at H-back here. I'm going to come across or fake across the line rather, and lead block on the reverse here for the ball carrier. 1-on-1 in space with the defender. What is that? Yes. What is that? This is, I mean, that that's bad. I mean, this is the type of blocking that you'll come out of a game with 7 catches, 88 yards and a touchdown, and you're graded at a 58 and you're wondering why. And it's because of this right here. I mean, this has huge potential. I mean, look at all this green grass. All he has to do is block a much smaller defender in space. And he puts his head down, gets out of position, just kind of lunges forward and just is all out of whack, has no base, gets top heavy and gets beat. And his assignment, if he blocks this defender here, this lineman is one-on-one all the way down here with the safety. There's nothing within 25 yards of this ball carrier. This could be a touchdown. Instead, it's like 8 yards. That is huge. That is like 45 yards or just a touchdown of hidden yardage, because you can't block a defensive back one-on-one as a tight end in the open field. And you weren't asked to pancake him. All you had to do was get in the way. There was so much room for the running back to work with that all you had to do was not just completely get top heavy and get beat to the inside right away. And that's exactly what happened. And there's more and more of that the more you watch of Sanders. He is the absolutely just prototype receiver downfield type of tight end that can make plays for you downfield, which is great, and loosen up the defense that way. But his blocking has to get a lot better, because plays like that showed up way too often on tape. And you're not going to get many snaps on the field in the league if that is what shows up time after time after time, regardless of how you are in the receiving game, because you need to be trusted. Coaches have to trust you, and you cannot be a tell for the defense whenever you're in the game, because they know you are so impotent at one aspect of the game that they don't have to worry about it. So it's something that needs a lot of work. Could it? Yeah, of course it can, right? You're in the NFL now. You're a grown ass man. You're a professional. You get some grown man strength. You treat this like your job physically, and it happens. But currently, the player today is very one dimensional, despite how tantalizing or tempting that one dimension is. He needs to really round out the rest of his game if he wants to be a consistent contributor in the league.
Couldn't have said it better. I will just kind of, because again, maybe we're harping on the negatives too much on some of these guys, but I do think his receiving ability it's not Bowers level, but it's really good. Like, he is a very, very good receiving tight end. He's essentially the same size as Bowers, maybe a couple pounds heavier. But the yak is something I would associate with him too. Like, this is a guy that when the ball gets in his hands, he can find space and he can get yards, right? They did that a lot. Only thing I will say, he had 2 sub 4.4 receivers playing on his team to open up space for him to have much more favorable matchups, have less kind of pressure on him. Really crazy, but like, Quinn Ewers, poor guy, decided to stay in college.
I don't know why.
Everyone,
yeah,
he's losing 5 weapons on that offense. Like, that's tough.
I think I've gone on record saying that Quinn Ewers would have been my quarterback 3 in this class. Quarterback 4 in this class after the whole Caleb, May, Daniels trio. I would have had him as QB4. But he returned to school, so we have to sit here and argue about J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix instead. One thing I will say too, which, again, I said it before, but full breakdowns, let us know if you want them, and we'll see how we can sort of navigate the YouTube intelligence agencies here. But he gets upfield very quickly in the receiving game too. It's not necessarily a build-up speed. No, he can get upfield quick. He is quick and fast when moving vertically, which is what makes him dangerous as a receiver. And that's a rare trait, and that's what's going to get his foot in the door in the league. Again, though, he just has to, once he's there, he cannot let the deficiencies in his game prevent him from actually reaching that ceiling and being a consistent contributor in the league.
Agreed. So if you are joining now, audio only people, thank you for tuning in. We did a full breakdown of the interior of the offensive line and the tight end group. So you can head to YouTube and see those clips, give us feedback, let us know what else you want to see. But let's jump in now into the ranking the all-22 era, where we think these guys are going to get drafted, if there's any good team fits we can see for these guys. Let's just have a fun conversation about it. And let's go back to that interior offensive line and start there. We kind of gave some of it away during the film sessions, but again, if you're audio only, let's start with number one. We had Jackson Powers-Johnson. I think both of us had him as the number one guy. But just to put that into perspective, I actually had him as my number one overall all-22 era prospect, all-22 era being 2020 through 2024. So 5 years of players. I have him as my number one, beating Tyler Linderbaum. And when we reviewed the film, one of the things I said is, this is the ideal frame and attitude that I want at center. And Tyler Linderbaum, while he was extremely technically sound and just a very good all-around player, he's very undersized. And that's actually a comparison I'm going to make later when we talk about Brock Bowers and where, Linderbaum ended up going in the draft. But Jackson Powers-Johnson, to me, is a better all-around prospect. And that means, to me, if he's better than a Tyler Linderbaum who went top 20 or just about 20, like that's probably where I see his floor in this draft. I think he can be a top, 13, 14 in that area. But if he goes, somewhere 15 to 20, that's a really good range for this player. I didn't have a great comp for him. I talked about a high school teammate of mine that I was comparing him to, which I'm not going to do.
Who's again. Like not 6'6", by the way, just throwing that out
my
there.
Height, but like really good at football. But this is a player I really like. I think in terms of landing spot, that's where it gets super interesting, because if he does start to fall, we talked about like the Packers for Tyler Guyton, but that's another team that could use a player like this that I would love to see fall, but he's not going to. So Ray, I'm going to hand it off to you. You tell me where you had him, and then start to tell me if you have any comps or landing spots for this guy.
Yeah, I like size and length in my centers, so I too had him above someone like Tyler Linderbaum when looking back throughout the sort of all-22 era when it comes to centers. So yeah, I think again, that's just more so personal preference at that point, because I can totally understand someone who would say, no, Linderbaum, his mobility and the stuff he showed on tape, regardless of what he weighed in at, was top notch, which it absolutely was. So it comes down to personal preference when you're talking that highly. And we're both talking about Tyler Linderbaum because there's not many great centers that have come out in recent years, like we've said. So it's, what are we going to talk about here? Like Joe Tippmann, of course, I also liked as well, but like, it doesn't make sense to compare someone like Jackson Powers-Johnson to again, no disrespect, like a Josh Myers or a Luke Fortner or something in that respect, right? I mean, this is a top level player. We're trying to do some peer comparisons here versus other first round type of players, and those are few and far between at center. So I think Powers-Johnson kind of puts himself in a tier of his own because of his physical traits and ability on top of his tape. So the preferred landing spot for me is the Miami Dolphins. And I've seen him mocked there a lot. And I think that's perfect. I think we saw how Connor Williams, when he transitioned to center, performed so well in that system. And he's not even really a fit for that system. They like some power there and length on the interior, or at center in particular, in that offense. And Connor Williams offered the mobility and the the knowledge of the game and so forth, a very heady player, but he does not have that power at all. That's not his game. And so Powers-Johnson brings what someone like Connor Williams did with that added dimension. And what they do in the run and pass game in that offense under Mike McDaniel is just, it's literally crazy. So I think that's the perfect fit for him. And I don't see him going past them at all. As much as I'd like him to go to somewhere like Dallas, it just won't happen. I don't see him getting past the Dolphins at 21. And to me, that's the ideal spot for him.
Okay. I mean, I really like that fit. The Dolphins made a mess of the way they did things, in my opinion, because you can't let Robert Hunt and Connor Williams leave when your biggest need is offensive line, right? So that would just be really bad if that ends up happening and you have to go that route. Although getting a player like Powers-Johnson would be great. I think
Powers-Johnson next to Hunt, man,
insane. The earliest this guy could go, Minnesota at 11 has a need. So if they keep Kirk and they want to keep him healthy after the injury, that might make sense. I think a really good landing spot is 16 to the Seahawks, right? Like this is just perfect fit. They love that type of player. Again, I called him a menace before. When you talk about Seattle offensive linemen, like that's what you want in Seattle. And, that offensive line would start to come together with Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross. That would be a really nice group starting to form. Second guy on my list, Troy Fautanu. And this is a little bit tricky because we talked about how he could end up being a tackle. But I have him as my number 2 interior offensive lineman. I think if I'm talking about him at tackle, I'd probably have him at 5 in this group right after JC Latham, but before Mims. So that's like how I'm saying, like, this is that good of a player in my mind. But at interior, I have him 2 in this group. And then all time, I have him right after Tyler Linderbaum. Again, we haven't had great interior offensive line groups. After Linderbaum was Zion Johnson, Kenyon Green, and Landon Dickerson. In my mind, this is a better player than all of those guys. Like he shows his toughness, his willing to get dirty, his technique, his movement skills. He has it all. He has that mean vibe to him. This is another guy I could see very well ending up in Seattle or Miami or the Steelers, right? Like I think the Steelers would actually be an interesting fit considering they drafted another offensive tackle last year. A lot of teams don't like to do that 2 years in a row. With Fautanu, you can get that flexibility to either play him at tackle or move him inside. I like that fit a lot. But I think it's the same range. Again, I have them both as very high-end prospects. So that means they're going to go in a similar range. I think the floor is Miami, pick 21, but he could go as early as pick 16.
Yeah, I had Seattle for him, and maybe it's because the Washington thing, right? He's just staying home and going to play for the Seahawks. But they love size on the interior, and that's what he brings to the table, along with that athleticism, to where they're set at tackle because they listened to us leading up to the draft class where they got Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. So you add someone like this to the mix who brings size and power to the inside, which you love, but with plus athleticism for the interior. I think it's perfect. They love to run the ball, and putting him in that situation will allow them to do so much, open up the run game so much with those 2 backs that they have over there in Seattle. Not to mention that, again, they have guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba who, again, are going to just have larger roles in the offense and kind of keep those boxes light when he's across from someone like a DK Metcalf. So I think the perfect fit is Seattle. I think it's a realistic spot. I think there's a lot of connections there. His style of play and what they look for, it fits like a glove. So I think that could be a match we see on draft night.
Okay. The next guy is the last one that I think will definitely go in the first round. Obviously, nothing's set in stone. He absolutely, he could fall into the second round. But I have Graham Barton as the third guy that I think should absolutely go in the first round. And to me, he's really the last surefire first round pick. Obviously, there's going to be situations where it could happen that he falls to the second round. But I think he is the last that I think has a very high likely probability that he is a first round pick. And for those that don't know, Graham Barton played left tackle mostly while at Duke, but he did spend 1 year at center. We did talk about this during the film breakdown, but just to recap it for audio only, he played over 2,500 snaps in 4 years, 6'5", 314 pounds. He really is this athletic tackle player that, we think just has the ability to move inside because maybe he doesn't have the length, and maybe his skills just translate better this way, right? So I guess, Ray, I'll ask you why you think he's better off suited on the inside. But, for me, just Graham Barton in general, like this is a prospect that when you see his film, you love every bit of it. Like you love everything you see. I have him pretty high up on my prospect link. So again, just that interior of the offensive line this year is just so special that he is the third guy that I have, but he's actually 8th for me on the all-time list right after a guy like Creed Humphrey. So again, just a special player, but would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, he's so fun to watch. I think the main difference between him and some of the other centers in this class, and he worked out as a center at the Senior Bowl, so we're anticipating his NFL position to be center, is that he, for example, Troy Fautanu that we just discussed, right? he has the length, the arm length measurements that he could move around the offensive line if needed. Graham Barton does not. I think he was under 33 inches at the combine. I think 32 and 7/8 or something like that was the official arm length measurement. And you do see it on tape sometimes when he is leaning forward a little bit because he's trying to get, he's not winning the length battle per se, but obviously he makes it work. He's a fantastic player, but that's what's going to limit him to the inside. And also not necessarily what limits him once he's on the inside, but it is a difference when you compare it to someone like Jackson Powers Johnson, who's a much bigger, lengthier center who allows you to do more as a result of that size. So that's what kind of keeps someone like Graham Barton out of the surefire top 15, top 20 status that someone like Powers Johnson is. But again, because he is still a great athlete, a fantastic player, well coached, who can step right in. He's a plug and play guy who will step in just fine as a starter at center. That's why he is sort of in that fringe top 30 range. I think he's going to be selected in the back half or the back end of the first round. But that's sort of what separates him from the elite tier, if you will, if you're putting someone like Powers Johnson in the elite category. Barton is just a step below that because he doesn't have quite the plus attributes physically. But outside of that, everything else is just check, from just technique, tape, athleticism on down.
Exactly. And there is this stretch, right, from 22 to I'd even say 27. There's a run of 5 teams that all need help on the interior of the offensive line. And that starts at 22 with the Eagles. So that could be a surprising landing spot for any of the next 3 guys we're really going to talk about, where Jason Kelce retires. And now there's this big hole at center. Yes, Landon Dickerson could do it. He could move over. They could go after a guard. But to me, there's these 3 guys in a row here, and any one of them can fill that spot. So curious what you think of the Eagles. If not, Texans, Cowboys, Packers, Bucks, and Cardinals all in a row, really just all would be good landing spots for him.
Yeah, it's interesting because we talk about how the need at some of these, at the offensive line position for some of these teams is either center or guard, right? Or it's like, or tackle or guard. And then we talk about the versatility of these prospects in this range and how they can kind of move down the line. So it gives you a lot of different options as to how this can play out. I think the ideal fit in that range would be Philadelphia because we've seen what they've done with the offensive line, the way that the style of Jalen Hurts plus the weapons that they have on the outside opens things up in the run and pass game and makes things a bit easier for offensive linemen to sort of diagnose and work against because you can't just simply, muck up the box and, you have the threat of Jalen Hurts at any given play with his legs. Again, that keeps defenses at bay quite a bit, and that does help offensive linemen, especially on the interior, where sometimes with a mobile quarterback like that, it can be a little tough on the tackles, depending on where that quarterback is going to be. It's not necessarily the case for someone on the interior at center, right? You're still just staying in front of your guy. That doesn't impact you as much. So I think Philadelphia is the ideal spot in that range. It's also probably around the top end of that range to where I could see him going in the draft. The next one is their division rival. Again, it's the Cowboys. If you draft Graham Barton to be at center to replace Tyler Biadasz, and he's playing between Tyler Smith, who's arguably the top guard, top young guard in the NFL, let's say maybe not guard overall, but top young guard in the NFL, and then next to Zach Martin, one of the top veteran guards in the NFL, there is no better place to be as a young player than on the same line with 2 of those guys, just like that, right? So that's a great situation to go into. So you mentioned a lot of teams there kind of needing both maybe a center and a tackle in that range, whether it's, the Cowboys, the Packers, and so on, the Texans. I think that's a great spot for him there, again, because he could just slide right in, be between 2 veterans and, again, a veteran quarterback as well. That's a great place for a young center to be.
Cool. The next 2 guys I have are kind of in a really tight spot for me. Like I could go either way on either of them. So Zach Frazier out of West Virginia, primarily played center, 22 years old, 6'3", 310 pounds, played over 3,200 snaps. So again, for those joining audio only. And then Cooper Beebe, who out of Kansas State, 23-year-old left guard, 6'4", 335 pounds, 100 snaps on his career. These are 2 guys that have played a ton of football and have played at a very, very high level. If you've seen any of their film, they're both more brute force type guys. Frazier with better movement skills than Beebe, but both of them just these great mauler athletes on the inside that have positional flexibility. Like we said, to me, I can see both of them either one of them, I should say, falling right at the end of the first round in that range we were just talking about. If a lot of these guys go and these teams want to fix the interior of the offensive lines. Cooper Beebe, on the other hand, I could see maybe falling right into that early second round. But teams are going to fall in love with these guys, I think. On the All-22 era for me, I have them 10 and 11, right after my boy last year, Steve Avila, and then right before a guy like Cesar Ruiz, who was a guy a few years ago I liked, hasn't been great in the NFL. But again, there just hasn't been that many guys to come into the league lately that you're excited about. I think this year, I just named 5 guys that I am very excited about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think looking back around that same time frame, I would have probably had Cesar Ruiz just ahead of it, because I was a big fan of Cesar Ruiz heading into the league. Like we've talked about, it hasn't exactly panned out. But and then probably both of them ahead of why did I just lose my train of thought? Anyway, behind Cesar Ruiz, ahead of whoever you just Avila. You didn't do the hand sign. At least I didn't see it. That's probably why I lost my. I couldn't remember. But yeah, I would have probably had them both above Steve Avila in the All-22 era rankings here. And the great thing about that is mine haven't been published from the past, so I could just oh yeah, I was totally right about these guys, right? Whereas yours are kind of down on paper, which always helps. But yeah, I think the thing, especially with Zach Frazier, is again, it's sort of a throwback because he's great at the things that are tougher for centers and looks like he could use some polish for the easy things. So it takes a little bit of getting used to when you see that on tape and go, okay, well then what exactly is a great fit for someone like that? And I think overall, because you see the ability to be such a complete center by sort of cleaning up those little things and rounding out the edges to his game, that I'm not sure how in love they are with well, it doesn't matter because of age in particular, but San Diego maybe taking over for like a Jake Brendel at the very end of the first round at center, I think would be a great spot for Zach Frazier. Shanahan's system is great for linemen who can kind of kick out and get on the move, but also because he has that strength to really anchor against zero techs and assignments really that line up at the nose. I think offers Shanahan a lot of flexibility. And again, it's just kind of a mutually beneficial fit there. Beebe's tough because again, it's when the personal bias sort of comes into play, right? Like I like guards who are lighter on their feet than kind of what I see, but I like watching him play. So I'm not sure exactly what a great fit would be as far as, again, we're looking into day 2 at this point. And there's so much variance that can sort of take place there. It's really all about landing spots. So for a specific team, I don't really have one just yet, other than I would like to see him again, just in sort of a more power offense. And again, kind of like I mentioned earlier on with Graham Barton, if you could surround him or platoon him next to a veteran early on in his career, I think that's helpful, because one of the things that any player on the offensive line or either of the lines has to adjust to in the league is the strength of, the grown man strength of their opponent and the guy lined up across from them. You can't just come in and physically overpower an NFL defensive tackle like you could against a Big 12 opponent. You cannot do that from the jump. Nobody could. So that's an adjustment that he's going to have to make. And you want him to be in a stable environment when he does sort of make that adjustment. And instead of just relying on his strength, can really refine the technical aspects of his game. And then when the natural strength comes, as he grows in the league, now you have a more complete player. So for me, it's not so much year one what seems to be the best stylistic fit, so much as so it's a stable environment and maybe some vets around him that can, kind of pick up the slack, if you will, as he grows.
Okay. I'm going to, say that I like him more than you do, and we'll see what happens. But two other guys I think are worth mentioning are Christian Haynes and Christian Mahogany. So Christian Haynes, 6'2", 213 pounds, out of UConn, and just a really good football player all around, but to me lacked certain nuances to his game that I saw of the other players, a little bit less dominant to play in and play out than the other guys. Christian Mahogany along those same line, just 23-year-old right guard, 6'3", 222, out of Boston College. Again, similar thing, just didn't see that killer instinct, didn't see that overall dominance that you want out of first or early second round prospects. So I have those guys more as like either late second round or mid to early third round guys, which is still good and still valuable and still players that teams will want. But for me, just I left them off of my rankings just in general because they fell outside of that top 15.
Yeah, those are more so like 7th round type guys in an all 22 startup, or all 22 rookie draft. That would be incredible if a rookie came in as a 7th rounder and wasn't like a 1st round pick. But if you're in a rookie draft this upcoming spring or summer in all 22, those are probably 7th round guys that, okay, maybe you have one final need at guard and like the top ones have been taken. I do like both of the players, right? But they do, like you mentioned, they lack that sort of, I think it's just the lower body explosion, that just last bit of spring in those legs that they lack that some of the others have. But I do like both of those players. So again, those are just some guys that, again, can develop and kind of grow in the league, but they're not going to be day one, I'm grading out really well type of guys that you could put in your lineup like some of these other guys can. I'll, of course, mention, because it could happen again where Penn State has a center drafted on day 2 of the NFL draft this spring as well. I'm going to throw out Hunter Norzad. In comparing him to his predecessor, Juice Scruggs, who was a 2nd-round pick for the Texans last year, who battled some injuries this year, didn't play a full year. I was a bit more impressed with Juice Scruggs than I was with Hunter Norzad. Especially if you look at the Ohio State game with Norzad, he really kind of struggled after he also had a talent shock against Michigan the year before when he lined up against Mazi Smith, before Mazi Smith mysteriously lost like 40 pounds and when he went to the NFL. Whole nother story. But another just sort of cerebral, smart center who gets the job done and has some flashes, but doesn't have that same lower body explosion of the top guys in this class. That's just one of the things, again, similar to the Christians, Haynes and Mahogany, that are missing in his game when you compare to the top guys. But a guy who's probably going to be drafted on day 2, likely worth a late round rookie draft flyer, or just someone to monitor early on in their career to see, if they gain any traction, maybe enter a starting lineup early on in their career, and you can see how they go from there. Again, not no-brainer guys, but someone worth watching outside of the other group of players who are probably going to be in the top 30, top 40.
Cool. So just to recap our interior offensive line rankings, it's Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon as our first, Troy Fautanu out of Washington as our second, Graham Barton out of Duke at 3, Zach Frazier, center out of West Virginia at 4, Cooper Beebe at number 5 from Kansas State, left guard. So with that, let's move quickly to tight end and try to wrap this thing up because we're running this thing deep right now, which is awesome. Love doing it, but I'm sure the listeners are trying. Let's wrap this thing up. So Brock Bowers, the generational talent that everybody's talking about. If you watched the first half of this episode, you heard me being a little down on him. I still am, and I don't think that he is this elite prospect that others maybe do. People are talking about him as, the same tier as a Kyle Pitts. I do not see that. So for me, I do have him as the number 1 of this year because this year, in my opinion, isn't nearly as good as the last few. But I have him at number 4 on my all 22 era list, which is behind Kyle Pitts, Pat Freiermuth, Michael Mayer, and then it's Brock Bowers. Because to me, Kyle Pitts offered this elite athleticism. I saw him as a potential elite receiver in the NFL, which I think he still has the capability of being. Pat Freiermuth and Michael Mayer, to me, were these extreme all-around tight ends with the blocking ability. Bowers, I think, is more of the receiver like a Pitts, but I see him significantly less skilled, in my opinion, than a Pitts was. And then again, the blocking ability still is there. It's just not nearly, in my opinion, what Freiermuth or Mayers was in the previous years. So that's where I have him, but I'm curious where you do, Ray.
So, yeah, I'm a bit higher on him than you, but agree with the overall sentiment that he's not the elite prospect that he's been billed as. Um, I would have him above Michael Mayer. I'd actually have him probably above Mayer, and he's right there with Fryermuth. I'd still go back and forth as to which one I like. I like more between the two, or liked more coming into the league between the two, because you have the more explosive playmaker in Bowers, but Fryermuth was so technically sound and such a physical player and blocker coming into the league that allowed him to step right in a place like Pittsburgh and just take the reins of tight end. So he's right there, I think, battling for that number 2 spot in the All-22 era. Like we mentioned, I was also very high on Sam Laporta. I would have probably had Sam Laporta like also just under both of those guys and definitely above Michael Mayer. So those are the top 4 tight ends that, if I were to rank them: Pitts, Fryermuth / Bowers, and then right below them coming into the league, Laporta. Obviously, Laporta kicked ass. And again, having him 4 is not a slight. I was still extremely high on him. Again, we're talking number 4 tight end over like the last 5 years, just strictly coming into the league. So super high on him. Let's not get that twisted. So yeah, he's going to be good. He's going to make plays. It's just how great is he going to be consistently? Maybe depends on fit. And like, I think he'd be great in a role like Baltimore, like the way they try to use Isaiah Likely, but obviously that's not a need for Baltimore. That's not where he's going to end up. We talked about the Chargers. That's probably a great fit for him, but we'll see if they pick him that highly. That's pretty rich for a player there at that position. So we'll see how it shakes out, but he's going to be good. It's just, can he be consistently, or he's going to be great at times. Can he be consistently great? I think is really just the book on Bowers.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And so the Chargers are a great landing spot for him. I think there is the possibility that they trade back and try to get additional picks because of how quarterback hungry some teams are, right? There's a chance that they can, move back 5-6 spots or to maybe where Minnesota or the Broncos are and get a Bowers at 10 or 11, right? I think that would be a good landing spot for him. But one of the comparisons I wanted to make is his skill set translated to what like Tyler Linderbaum was. And I had kind of teased that earlier, right? Linderbaum was seen as this elite center prospect, but was significantly undersized for the position. Bowers might not be as significantly undersized, but he is undersized. And I wonder if teams kind of view that the same way, where again, Quentin Nelson was the perfect package at guard and he went top 10, whereas Linderbaum, being the high skill set, but not the great frame, ended up going 25, right? So I'm not saying that the fall will be as drastic for Bowers, just because we still see these teams reaching for tight ends like a Kyle Pitts when they think they're elite. So they go for them very early. But could Bowers, because of that smaller frame, end up falling a little bit? And I think the Saints at 14, the Colts at 15, the Seahawks at 16, the Bengals at 18, like those are all landing spots that probably would love to have a guy like Bowers. And again, you're getting an elite talent. It's just what impact, one, does the tight end position have on your team? I think, the Falcons saw very well that as good as Pitts is, he's not changing their entire team, right? Like a quarterback would, like a great receiver would. So that fall, that'll make the position fall, I think. And I think the Colts would love to have him for Richardson. I think Geno Smith would love to have him in Seattle. Obviously, the Bengals have been just filtering in and out these young tight ends, trying to get one to hit. And they've recently talked about how they'd like to solve that, right? Like they would like to solve that. Bowers solves that.
Yeah, that's not bad. Bowers would solve that. So yeah, he's an intriguing option for a lot of teams, especially as you get into that middle of the first. It's just who decides to make, to pull the trigger on that position with their first round pick. And then, how creative can they be using him?
Oops, sorry, I was on mute there. Okay, my number 2 tight end of this draft is Jatavion Sanders, and I have him well below that, right? I have him at 12 because, similar to Bowers, he is not an all-around tight end. He is, a willing blocker at times, but just still makes a lot of mistakes there. He's much more of a receiving tight end. eats on yak. I have him right between Harrison Bryant and Jelani Woods. Again, like these more athletic tight ends. Jelani Woods not being, he's a giant, so I'm not going to really loop him in there. But Dalton Kincaid, Harrison Bryant, Jatavion Sanders, like I have him in that world of they're probably not every down tight ends. They're not going to change your offense. You're not going to be able to plug him in there and just let him run things. He's going to take time to learn. A lot of tight ends, as we're seeing, really don't do much on their first contract. Like the impact is just not there. It takes until they get to their second. We're seeing that with Evan Ingram, right? Like guys that are seen as these great receiving tight ends, maybe they have one big year, but it just takes a while. Noah Fant is another example of a tight end that just, seen as this great athlete, but just didn't put it together on his first contract and is now kind of bouncing around teams. So Jatavion Sanders, I see him in that world again at the 12 spot. I don't see him as a first rounder though. So I think he falls into the second, and any of the teams second, or honestly, it could even be early third, but I think it's more likely second. I think any of the teams we said before in the first round for Bowers, if they don't get him, they could go after Sanders in the second.
Yeah, that's about right. Exactly. I think you'll see that too, is that there may be a run on tight ends in the second and mini run, because sometimes runs can be 6 or 7 deep. I don't think it's that far for tight ends, but yeah, depending on, when Bowers goes in the first, some of those middle of the round teams who didn't get that tight end taken care of in the first round are probably going to make a run at it in the second. The draft is funny at times. So all I'll add to what you said, which I completely agree, is that whichever one of these tier 2 tight ends ends up on the Chiefs, then it's stock up, because you see the clear path to replace Travis Kelce, and you see the proof of concept already, obviously. So again, we talked about those teams in the middle rounds, but if the Chiefs nab one of these guys, a Johnson or a Sanders, for example, then just get ready, because in pretty much any format, all 22 or standard dynasty, their stock is going to be on the rise, because people are going to be looking to like the 2025 season and beyond and see that clear path to playing time in a fantastic system with a great supporting cast.
Just giving up on Noah Gray, huh?
Yeah. Just sorry, Noah. It's, there's too many Noahs out there. Fant, Gray, monogamy.
It just doesn't work.
He's not a tight end. It doesn't work. Yeah. No.
All right. Well, my number 3 tight end is Cade Stover out of Ohio State, which we reviewed earlier. A guy that has this really nice overall game with maybe no extreme high-end traits, but also really no red flags, right? When you watch his game, it's just consistent, play in, play out, does decent things with the ball in his hand, but it's just not going to be this standout receiver. You don't want him to be somebody you have to rely on in the receiving game. But 23 years old, 6'4", 251, played 1,500 snaps, had over 1,000 yards receiving, 10 touchdowns on his career at Ohio State. I see him as more of that mid to late second. I think that's like we're talking about that run. I don't think necessarily Sanders goes significantly before Stover, although I do think he is, because the upside is just a little bit higher because of the receiving ability. I have him a little bit more. So like I would want him maybe early second, where I think Stover, it's mid to late. That's kind of my 2-3, with Theo Johnson being my 4. Theo Johnson, the tight end out of Penn State, 6'6", 264, 23 years old, 1,700 snaps. Had a great combine. We talked about this already during the film session. Had an awesome combine, and I think his stock went up. I think that's the run, right? I think it's those 3 guys between the mid-second to maybe the early third. I had Theo Johnson before the combine as a late third, but I think just that combine was insane. I think he definitely gets taken earlier now.
Yeah. And like we kind of mentioned during the film portion of this in the first half, there was some aversion over the middle of the field with a young quarterback this past year, which I think hindered Johnson a bit. And at times he didn't help himself either. But I think that's a part of kind of what kept him from flashing that athleticism a bit more. Saying all that, he still is not yet quite the complete tight end. And, there are things that are going to have to be checked out with that shoulder, making sure that all is okay there as well. We'll see how the medicals check out coming out of the combine. You normally start to hear whispers in the coming weeks now that everybody's kind of back home. But So yeah, but I think that's really the run, and those are the guys that are really going to be in play for you on the All-22 platform as rookies. Is really that group of 4 early on, and then you just see how it plays out. Landing spot, I think, for tight ends 3 and 4 in that stack probably weighs a bit as to either one of them potentially jumping the other and seeing how they ultimately shake out. But yeah, those are the 4 to focus on.
Yeah, and AJ Barner, Ben Sinnott, I think that's how you say his name.
Sinnott,
they're both guys that I think are worth keeping an eye on. Sinnott in general had a really nice combine as well. But watching the film, watching the film though, I didn't quite see it like I did the other guys. So I left him off of the high level of this conversation. So just another guy to keep an eye on. I think the teams could fall in love with a guy like Sinnott and take him maybe early to mid 3rd round. So it's an exciting group. And again, this is a really deep draft of receiving talent. And it only gets deeper when you add guys like Brock Bowers and Jatavion Sanders. So it's going to be an exciting draft. We're going to keep doing this again. We'll go to maybe receiver next. I don't know. That one's going to be a big episode. So I hope you're ready.
Gosh, yeah. Yeah, that might be like a series because it's so deep. But yeah, pause. Well, maybe we'll knock out receiver next. There's a lot of great ones to talk about, and I mean the great debates out there, right? Oh, Neighbors, Harrison, Neighbors. Everyone's kind of weighing in, and then others are like, well, Dunsley's right there. Well, maybe we'll check on that next week.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, just a teaser, I have 10 receivers in my first 2 rounds. So guys that I give 1st or 2nd round grades on. That's pretty insane. So yeah, again, it's a really nice group. Guys, we made the announcement, so I'm just going to say it, right? We have a mobile app dropping very, very soon. So if you don't play All-22 yet, you definitely want to go to all-22.com to sign up because we will be releasing that mobile app soon, and you're going to want to check it out. Thank you all for tuning in. If you haven't yet, please give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at all22_PFF and leave us a review wherever you watch or listen to your podcast. And thanks for tuning in.